The house on Malaya Lubyanka Street. What an evil night. Madame Blavatsky peered with a glum expression into the basement of number 7 in house 16 on Malaya Lubyanka Street. A dark, malignant shadow hung over the holy white-walled mother city of times past, its golden-domed churches either razed to the ground or desecrated by devils. In the 37 years since her physical death, the same grim realization had plagued her on many a night. Saving a decade when the Tsar had announced the Edict of Toleration of Religion and opened the astral doors of Russia to the work of occult schools, things down below had gone from bad to worse. Poor man, she thought, shaking her head. The die had already been cast with the attempted assassination and subsequent death of his saintly father, Alexander II. Perhaps the greatest evil had begun on that fateful day, she brooded. Never did I witness such a sincere, unanimous grief. Never did I think that a ragged crowd, 50,000 men strong, composed mostly of our working factory heads, peasants and beggars, vicious and half-starved as the Moscow populace now are, could stand for 2 long hours, suffocating each other around the many Kremlin churches, and weep, as I have seen them weep today. It seemed as if their hearts were breaking. It was a terrible strain upon one's nerves. She shuddered to think of what had unfolded since that time. The slaughter of the imperial family had come in the midst of a horror so great she had never believed it possible. A sinister fate seemed to have pursued the Romanovs, she wondered, of whom not one had met a natural death since Peter the Great. Dark clouds looming on the horizon, fulminating in the distance and clearly visible from her vantage point in Kathmandu, told her that hell was bubbling over. In the basement of number 7, the zealous Mr. Vadim Karlovich Chekhov, a physicist of some renown who worked in the Moscow branch of the Lenin Brain Institute, was adjusting a dial on the psychic machine. It stood at one end of an enormous table which spanned the length of the room. The earnest young man had found, to his chagrin, that Madame Blavatsky was still blocking its receptors, and once again he attempted to reason with her. "I know that it is dangerous, Elena Petrovna, but surely you can't expect us to sit here and do nothing. Just look at what those devils are up to. The Emperor is long dead, and poor Master Butator is locked up in Solevski in the worst of all worlds. No end to their depravity is in sight." He was right, of course, but Madame Blavatsky was none the less determined to do everything in her power to divert him from his suicidal course of action. Time was running out. As their exchange became more heated, sparks flew from the machine and sweat began to pour down Vadim Karlovich's face. This would be so much easier if she would only get on side with his plan. But since the debacle with Lenin and the Ruriks, she refused to intervene directly with the Soviet hierarchy. "The more you interfere, the worse it gets," she repeated for the 100th time, her patience running thin. "They've found a way to feed off your energies, and they will keep turning things around. These are no ordinary human beings, Vadim Karlovich. They're vampires. You've seen what the American branch did to me all those years ago. A firing squad will be the least of your worries if the Reds discover what you're up to. When they discover it. What makes you so sure you can escape the fate of the Petrograd Circle?" "Because members of our circle have higher positions. We're better organised. And we have the blessing of the unknown philosopher. I'll remind you that when he left Russia, he began to set the wheels in motion from a base in Central Europe. And Nina Pavlovna is doing magnificent work. She has already infiltrated the upper levels." Madame Blavatsky inhaled deeply on her cigarette. They're far more powerful than you realise, Vadim Karlovich. They will take the work of EMESH and twist it to suit their goals. Why do you think Vladimir Ilyich is embalmed in a ziggurat with a 33rd degree conferred upon him? They are subverting your efforts to work black magic. She paused before delivering her parting shot. You're letting your personal desire get the better of you. Or should I say, Eugene Karlovich's desire? This stung the younger Tchaikovsky more than he cared to admit, for his father, who also inhabited the spacious apartment, had said the same thing to him over breakfast that very morning. Well, it's easy for you to say, he implored. We have to live through this reign of terror. All you have to do is watch and criticise our efforts. If you would free up the machine, I could try to reconnect with Nikolai Tesla and obtain the blueprints for a weapon that will destroy them. Even Rasputin would be useful, if only the line was free to call him. The lights on the machine were flashing red, but Vadim Karlovich could not prevent his feelings getting the better of him. Admit it, Elena Petrovna. You're afraid of them. No sooner did the thought escape his brain when he regretted it. It was a sore point which he and the others had skirted around for years, because he was right. She was afraid of them. As if in response to the tremors of his ego, the machine shuddered violently for a moment and then shut down completely, as if it were dead. He sighed in frustration and pulled off the headpiece, yanking at the tangle of wires until they were lying in a mess on the table before him. He poured a glass of Stolichnaya and gulped it down, followed by another. The liquid burned his throat and numbed his brain with reassuring speed. God, what a night, he thought again. The disastrous conversation with Elena Petrovna, the latest in a long line of disputes, had left him shaken. Despite his contrary arguments, he took very seriously her warning. Ice dripped into his bones as he felt the web of the spider being drawn around him. He lit a cigarette and looked around the darkly cavernous space with his clinical scientist's eyes and philosopher's soul. He wondered what the report might look like if they happened to discover such an unrivalled cache of illegal documents and equipment. Imagine a table running the entire length of the basement, and you know how huge those basements are, General Secretary. On the table were occult books, works of black magic and sorcery, documents of an illegal secret organisation. But it wasn't just theoretical, General Secretary. Oh no. These are cunning scientists of the first order, employed by our State Brain Institute, no less. There were many pieces of equipment, chemical reagents, strange glass bottles and stones, animal bones, resin, exotic herbs. Yes, General Secretary, almost like the lair of that damned scoundrel Rasputin. Worse, in fact. What really came to mind when I saw the cursed secret laboratory of Vadim Karlovich and his henchmen was the first black magician to taint our land, Arthur D. himself, subverter of the Tsar and spy to that queen of the wicked empire, Elizabeth I of England. A pile of hair was found at one end of the table, and nearby in the corner was a device they call a psychic machine. Vadim Karlovich swore it wasn't working, but at that moment it began winking with lights. He refused to say who the hair belonged to, but we made later inquiries, and well... At this point, Vadim Karlovich thought, the man would go pale and hastily changed the subject. Also confiscated were various electronic instruments, including a very large device that they used for teleportation, illegal printing equipment, and weapons that included an ancient sword. A sword! As you know, General Secretary, the father, Karl Nikiforovich, is a Roman Catholic of noble birth. Vadim Karlovich imagined the eyebrows being collectively raised at this. Someone might swear under their breath, or even spit into a fire. In the clandestine laboratory, General Secretary, magical experiments were staged. Hypnosis and telepathy, killing at a distance with the help of wax feathers and figures. All under the registered guise of finding a cure for eczema and haemophilia. We did find the formulas for such medicines amongst the many papers, he added as an afterthought. And how does Vadim Karlovich explain all of this, you might well ask? He gives the appearance of being a respectable man, and is so naive as to believe himself innocent. He says he was driven by the desire to combine the mystical experience of orthodox ascetics with the data of contemporary science. He wishes, so to speak, to master grace on a scientific basis. The result of all this, General Secretary, is that entirely by chance, for we were really visiting this house to arrest the father, the people's commissariat of the railways, called Tchaikovsky, we happened upon the headquarters of the Russian Rosicrucians, the order EMESH Redivivus. The purpose of this order was, with the help of scientific experiments conducted in the laboratory, to master the forces of nature and to find a mechanism for changing the human psyche. The maximum program included the construction of a magical temple and a city of initiates who would possess inexhaustible magical resources up to immortality. Wholly by accident, we found ourselves amidst the self-styled ancestors and reincarnated souls of the Atlantean race, which perished when their abuse of magic created a vortex in nature which destroyed their realm. We know all this because a large archive of manuscripts which completely expose the existence of the occult order was also found in the building. I cannot help but notice, General, that this very same building is just 350 meters away from our own head office. It is an outrage! And what of this psychic machine? The General Secretary would naturally ask, with eyes like black stones extracted from the bowels of hell. You say that a piece of hair was found close to this psychic machine. Do you know who the hair belonged to, comrade? At this dreaded question, the secretary would steady himself on the back of a chair and, looking straight ahead, his voice beginning to waver, would reply, almost in a whisper, "It was yours, General Secretary. The hair belonged to you." What came next, Vadim Karlovich hardly dared contemplate, for the hair did indeed belong to Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, sequestered from the General Secretary's own barber. Through this odious black clump, the EMESH inner circle was attempting to control the tyrant's psyche. Worse than this, if that were possible, they were trying to exert this control by influencing the OGPU employees who were stationed nearby, practically across the road. As he considered the likely contents of a prosecution that could be brought against him, against every member of the EMESH, whose records were kept in that very same basement, Vadim Karlovich realized it was almost time for the next general meeting and began to arrange the papers and light candles. Whilst he was going about this pleasantly dull chore, he reflected back upon the group discussion of the past few weeks. Every member of the inner circle had sworn himself without reserve to their goal of regenerating the egregore of Atlantis and creating a magical seat of world government at their heart. Once this seat of control was established, they would be ideally placed to bring peace and happiness to the entire earth and its peoples. The men considered themselves to be Rosicrucians, and, as Vadim Karlovich's founding partner, the diplomat Eugene Karlovich Teger, had said, they sought to surpass all existing occult organizations including Masonic ones, to realise magical theory and practice by attaining power that enables implementation, to establish initiation to magic on a worldwide scale. Their name, EMESH Redivivus, signified the reborn unity of the three planes of being through the three Hebrew mother letters of Aleph, the mental plane, Mem, the astral plane, and Shin, the physical plane. Their core literature, which included a few huge illustrated volumes, was stacked up on the table. It included their foundational text, the Encyclopedia of Occultism by G.O.M, who had also assigned the group its name, Karl Brandler-Pracht's Occultism, and assorted works by Swami Vivekananda and Sardinoil. The group had evolved out of the Order of World Secrets, and there were now 4 levels. The first was for those individuals who knew nothing about the existence of the organisation and consisted of a few exceptional students at elite Moscow and Petrograd institutes. Fewer in Petrograd since the infamous case of the Leningrad Freemasons, which had resulted in the arrest of Mebes and his wife Maria. Second was a level of those who, whilst following the course and perhaps attending 1 or 2 informal meetings, had begun to suspect the existence of a hidden occult order with a magical agenda. Numbered amongst them were friends, colleagues, and older students of the leading members, Eugene Karlovich and Vadim Karlovich himself. As Eugene Karlovich was an important diplomat, he had also done much to extend their network beyond the borders of the Soviet Union into Afghanistan and Western China. These efforts were greatly assisted by the works of the White Russian Sisters, led by Nina Pavlovna Rudnikova, who served as the Shin element for their White Guard and loyal Russian citizens in the Eastern European diaspora. The third level of EMESH Redivivus admitted those who had been told about the magical inner circle and had begun to understand its aims, some of its aims at least, but without knowing its name, organisational structure, or identity of the leaders and officers. Finally came the innermost core of the group, ranged around Teger as commander, Tchaikovsky as pure curator, and another man, named as an assistant. Those in the inner circle, who also included Tchaikovsky's wife, knew the name and aims of the organisation and were granted the right to use its materials and facilities. All had pledged to devote themselves to EMESH to the exclusion of other occult groups and their materials. The incognito magicians at the veiled heart of this order must, according to Teger, be higher than the spiritual and secular authorities in the entire world, committed to the Russian Rosicrucian dream of recreating the culture of Atlantis, which would enable them to influence all planes of existence and to thereby govern the world by magical means. Vadim Karlovich wondered how the Chekist regime would react to the disclosure of stated aims of EMESH, as set out in the manifesto he'd just filed away beneath the treatment for haemophilia in an ordinary-looking filing cupboard. This 9-point manifesto ran broadly as follows, in dramatic calligraphic script that was repeated in 12 languages, 6 ancient, the others modern. 1. The scientific study of metaphysical phenomena, especially works on telepathy and clairvoyance. 2. Arcanology and preliminary occult training. 3. Magical praxis. 4. Formation of the conceptual centre, EMESH Redivivus, and its astral egregore. This was the confirmed level achieved by the group at the current time of February 18th, 1928. 5. A development of EMESH into a suitable base for serious occult work and magical praxis over a number of years. 6. The greater expansion of EMESH, which could only follow the attainment of certain results, chief amongst which was the establishment of a world centre for occult magic. This might be physically headquartered either in the USSR or abroad, and here certain preferred countries were listed, including Brazil. 7. A global occult centre and magical headquarters which has full control of the astral plane. As he considered this 7th point, Vadim Karlovich trembled from head to toe, as if a phantom had crossed his grave. Already the rival egregores had reached monstrous proportions. The untold sacrifice of so many noble and innocent souls, human and animals together, during the Great War, had unleashed astral forces of previously unimagined power. These had left their root nations in a parlous state, but the great Western powers were largely in denial about the extent of the precipice they were falling over. They had not come to terms with their loss, and nor would they, until even worse came. The same titanic forces had facilitated the growth of EMESH to an electrifying degree, and Vadim Karlovich knew, deep down, that the group egregore had become extremely volatile with the huge and rapid influx of power. Huge enough, perhaps, to propel the group through stages 7 and 8, even if the base could be consolidated in time. 8. A global occult centre and magical headquarters which has full control of the mental plane. This had to be done, Vadim Karlovich thought desperately, or the Reds would seize the initiative and gain an upper hand. Already their propaganda was proving highly effective and spreading like wildfire. 9. A global occult centre and magical headquarters which has full control of the divine plane. His partner, Eugene Karlovich, arrived early ahead of the general meeting. It was agreed they would attempt to psychically influence their captors by whatever means they had at their disposal, and, most crucially, that the identity of the Moscow Saint-Germain must be kept hidden at all costs. As the rest of their members began to arrive, one by one stating the password from the other side of the door, the psychic machine had sprung back to life, its red lights blinking the alarm signal. This time it was accompanied by a note, which Vadim Karlovich snatched up. It bore only 2 scrawled words, written in capitals, with a grim finality. "They're coming."